Chapter 11. Valdes was behind the wheel when we left the hospital. She took us to a drive-thru for a few bags of burgers, made a pit stop at a liquor store for some emergency supplies. Valdes did the driving there, too, while I waited in the truck, and finally parked in a shaded, isolated corner of a municipal parking garage, located across from the city administration complex. We had a clear view of the 4-story building, and Valdes was transfixed. I shoved the last half of a final burger into my mouth and swallowed the massive lump after a few chews. I could almost feel the greasy mash of meat, bread, and potatoes as it soaked up the remaining drops of my hospital whiskey bomb. Valdes may have been the proverbial wrecking ball to my day, but lunch was a heaven-sent sidebar from what was turning into a bleak reality. A plan delayed never tasted so good. I crumpled the burger wrapper and tossed it over my shoulder into the back of the cab. Valdes was practically stoic as she stared intently at the admin building. I rubbed a hand over my mouth and cleared my throat. Last time I was out this way, I was paying a code enforcement fine with a backpack full of pennies, I said. They had to count every single red cent. Figured if code enforcement was going to be a pain in my ass, I might as well be a pain in theirs, too. Valdez's focus was unflapped, and she responded in a monotone without looking at me. Code enforcement provides a critical service to municipalities, establishing clear guidelines for citizens to follow in order to maintain sensible order. Yeah. Okay, sure. I offered a grunt of indifference in response. That was Valdes in a nutshell. She was either obsessively focused on a singular task, or cursing up a storm with no regard for social norms. Most of the time, Valdes sounded like she had a mouth of a sailor who fucked his cousin, sucked up the cream pie, and then snowballed it into a hooker's mouth. She was practically the little sister I never had. I shot another glance at Valdes while she was focused on the building. She was still wearing my jacket, and after we left the hospital, she pulled her curly hair back into its usual ponytail. She was simple and efficient that way. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've never seen her wearing a lick of makeup. Not that it would ever be a topic of conversation, but I imagine she saw as much use in lipstick as I did with, well, people in general. Back in the day, I might have written her off as just being weird. Thanks to Josephine's ongoing influence, I can describe Valdes as being something of an autistic savant. This went a long way to explain how her moods could turn on a dime, and how she could be laser-focused on a single task one moment, and then a rage of emotions the next, all while sporting a kind of special programming that left these inexplicable emotional whirlwinds blind to my psychic pull. Also, Valdes lacked the average person's social filter, which only made me like her more. You gonna fill me in on what we're doing here? Valdes twitched as if I had startled her awake. She scratched her cheek and pointed to the corner of the administration building in front of us. See that side entrance with a green canopy? I did. It was connected to a small gated lot full of reserved parking spaces. A white luxury sedan was parked near the canopy, probably a Cadillac from the looks of it. Next to the automatic gate, at the other end of the private lot, was a rent-a-cop security patrol in a golf cart. That's the private entrance for elected officials. Mayor, council members, tax collector, you get the idea, Valdes explained. The privileged 1% get quick, unobstructed access to chambers so they never have to face their constituents, at least not without a mute button to cut the microphone during public comments. I raised an eyebrow. Long ago, Gertie had been one of those constituents who had her microphone cut off when the city council had heard enough of her thoughtful and well-reasoned arguments against the invasive spread of parking lots. She knew how to work a system, but city government still only amounted to headaches for everyone involved. The caddy belongs to one Ernest David White, Valdes continued. He's the District 3 councilman 4 terms running. Well, either the Honorable White is taking advantage of taxpayer-subsidized long-term parking, or he's putting in some weekend hours. Valdes nodded curtly. It's not unheard of for elected officials to work the weekend, but it is rare. They're usually too busy knocking balls around on the links or fucking barely legal pool boys. Anyway, they all keep public calendars, and obviously Jacoby follows them closely, for reasons. Councilman White? He had a 1-hour meeting scheduled today. Even though the city is closed for business. Bingo. See? I'm not as dumb as I look. So, who's he meeting with? Valdes turned in the driver's seat and reached into the back of the cab, digging a camera out of her bag. The heft of a long zoom lens made the small-framed girl grunt softly, which made me smile. Well, that's what we're here to find out, she said, clicking the camera on and aiming it at the canopy. Of course, any helpful meeting details were conveniently left off the public calendar, which honestly just raises more red flags, and instead of potentially spooking the councilman from having the meeting, Jacoby wanted me to scope it out and see if we can't answer that question ourselves. I twisted the cap off a fresh bottle of whiskey and looked from Valdez's long lens to the green canopy. After a swig of whiskey, I murmured, "What goes in must come out." Valdes propped the lens on the steering wheel and adjusted the focus, studying the screen on the back of the camera. While she made her adjustments, I popped open the glove box to retrieve a travel humidor I kept stashed for occasions like these. There were 1.5 stogies tucked inside. I took the half-finished one, saving the last good cigar as a victory dance for when this whole mess was behind me. By the time I rolled down the window and got comfortable, the cigarette lighter popped, and I used the glowing coils to get the stogie going. The cigar was strong, bitter, and over-smoked. I chased it with another swig of whiskey, and almost felt normal. Valdes flipped open a reporter's notebook and started a log for the stakeout, noting the time, date, and location. She even sketched out a bird's-eye diagram to visually represent our vantage point of the private entrance. She fancied herself a private investigator, complete with a license from the city and this dopey hipster fedora she sometimes wore at night, although, to be fair, she somehow makes it work. If I'm being honest, she's not all that bad at the gig. Maybe one day she could be great, but right now, she essentially operated as an extracurricular freelancer for the St. Charles Sentinel. The newspaper itself was mostly a digital operation these days, run by a skeleton staff, and helmed by a trust-funded millennial, moon-eyed navel-gazer named Will Jacoby. In other words, Valdes was a beat reporter without any of those pesky journalistic responsibilities. You know, like actual writing. She did field research, stakeouts and low-level investigations, ran down leads, collected evidence, and then handed it all over to Jacoby. He would turn around and spin it into whatever narrative fit his liberal agenda. Most of the time, Jacoby was able to use the intel Valdes surfaced to turn the screws on more important people. People like District 3 Councilman Ernest David White. "You want to talk about Dockside?" Now it was my turn to twitch in surprise. She asked the question as nonchalant as ever, not even taking her eyes off the building. I grunted dismissively and responded, "I'd rather talk about why Jacoby thinks this white fella is connected with Nazis." Valdes responded quickly, flatly, and still with zero movement. "They're called the Sons of the Golden Future." "Come again?" Valdes went back into her bag and pulled out a folder thick with papers and photos. She handed it to me and repeated, "The Sons of the Golden Future. Just another way of saying Nazis. Like white nationalists, or white supremacists, the alt-right." "Patriots, and the Republican Party," I grunted, flipping open the folder. I spat out the word patriot to emphasize how much the word had been bastardized. Valdes dropped her head in a single nod. "Exactly. This country has been bent over backward to normalize white rage, and now we're slapping all kinds of fucking labels on it to distract stupid people from the truth. Those Proud Boys, the GOP, the motherfucking Sons of the Golden Future. At the end of the day, they're all just a bunch of fascist nationalists. Goddamn fucking Nazis," I said, finishing her thought. The folder was full of background on Nazi Germany between the 1920s through the 1940s. Hitler, Aryan master race, the Holocaust. The background turned to post-World War II neo-Nazi and nationalist movements, blossoming into the rage-filled good people on both sides of modern politics. "Word on the street is that you got your ass kicked," Valdes said, her eyes still trained on the admin building. I looked up from her Nazi research folder. "I didn't get my ass kicked." "That's not the word on the street." "What street?" "You know what I mean." Valdes finally met my gaze. "What the hell were you even doing at Dockside?" "What do you think I was doing?" I scoffed and turned back to the folder. She had highlighted a specific section of the text and scribbled, "Sins of our fathers," in the margin. "What's this about an American racist model?" Valdes let out a humorless snort through her nose. "Huh, karmic justice for the greatest motherfucking country in the world," she said sarcastically. "Racism was so institutionalized in America, the country was built on the backs of African Americans. Slaves were constitutionally defined as 3/5 of a person, and no one but the white man had the right to say jack shit about how our society should function. It was so institutionalized that Hitler saw it as a model example and an inspiration for the Nazi Party." My stomach turned with an unexpected sourness. "If Hitler is the father of the Nazi movement," Valdes continued, "then the United States of America is the goddamn grandfather, but don't you dare fucking mention that at Thanksgiving dinner." fucking Nazis.
Fucking America.
So these Sons of the Golden Shower.
Future.
I grunted, like it made a difference. These circle jerk cum swappers are the ones keeping the dream alive. I flipped another page in the research and took a series of puffs on the stogie to keep it burning. Valdes's research jumped forward to the Obama administration.
They're no different than the Ku Klux Klan, only with fewer wizards and fucking normalized to shit,
she said.
They officially organized in '08 with some kind of horseshit about the first black president ushering in the Great Recession as a way to oppress the great white male. The anonymity of the internet helped the group legitimize, although those are Jacoby's words more than mine. Anonymity means no accountability, which just means angry white assholes are free to say whatever's really on their mind.
And then we got an overgrown Oompa Loompa in the White House.
And one by one, the angry white assholes began stepping out of the shadows and into the golden light of a brighter, whiter future.
Valdes finished.
Normalized, institutionalized, fetishized. They even have a fucking website.
I flipped another page in the folder and, sure enough, she had printed out the first few pages of the Sons of the Golden Future's website. The word Nazi was obviously nowhere to be found, but it was clear how thinly whitewashed the white rage was. The website proclaimed white men were a minority in their own country, and that white pride was about remembering, preserving, and continuing a culture that the mainstream media had proclaimed misogynistic, outdated, and hateful. I flipped through more website printouts but found no information about the organization's leadership. So, who's in charge of this circus of chauvinistic junkie monkeys? I asked.
Therein lies the comically ironic twist of the modern Nazi movement,
Valdes answered.
In order to be a member, you have to pledge a loyalty oath to the organization, come out to the fucking world by publicly instigating fights in support of male supremacy or some other bullshit, and get a fucking tattoo. 3 dots on the base of your shaved skull, one for God, one for country, one for the Sons of the Golden Future. And whoever's organizing this shit show, they stay in the shadows, veiled by the exact same anonymity they deny their followers.
And Jacoby thinks this Councilman White character is your prime suspect? Valdes nodded in agreement.
Me, though, that name Samson dropped earlier, I've heard it a few too many times for it to be a coincidence.
I sifted through the soggy remains of the Play-Doh brains and pulled the name back up. Peter, I said. Peter and the other guy.
Councilman White, hypothetically.
You think they're working together?
I think we're close to finding out.
I took a long drag on the dwindling stogie and rolled the smoke around until it burned.
You know, if you needed booze, you could have called me,
Valdes said in an uncharacteristically soft tone, though any sense of sympathy was quickly erased with a more on-brand bit of snark.
'Cause, like, running around town and getting your ass beat kind of diminishes your credibility on the Muscle for Hire network.
I barked out an unexpected chuckle and fished for my flip phone. Tell that to Beckett Miller. He hired me this morning to back him at tonight's rally so he can talk to this girl. I pulled up the text Beckett had sent me containing the girl's picture. I turned the phone to Valdes so she could see the image. It was low resolution and grainy on the postage stamp screen. Valdes literally winced.
Jesus fucking Christ, Abe. We have the technology, man.
Kids and their fucking technology. Like it mattered. I noted my displeasure with a grunt and flipped the phone shut. Even with the super empathy giving me no read on Valdes, I could tell she wasn't thrilled about me working the rally. The reason was no mystery either. Putting aside the sheer volume of people, it was going to be ground zero for a goddamn nuclear bomb of abject hate, anger, and violence. The way that confluence of emotional nightmare fuel would race down the piano wire of the pull, well, that was what really worried Valdes.
Abe.
I'll be fine, I said flatly. Valdes looked at me, her eyebrows knitting and those big brown eyes turning stormy.
Abe, you don't know how...
I cut her off, gesturing to the green canopy with the stub of the stogie. Game time, kiddo. Valdes whipped her attention around and raised the camera to start shooting. The shutter clicked rapidly in a shitty impression of an automatic firearm. The first 2 men who emerged from the canopy were in plain clothes, jeans and polo shirts. One carried a messenger bag over his shoulder and was stuffing papers inside while the other was putting on sunglasses. Even at my distance, I could see the one in the sunglasses was the chief of police. Interesting. Next out of the building was a uniformed officer walking with a stagger and holding something to his face.
Stu fucking Sampson,
Valdes said underneath the sound of her rapid-fire photos. I guess I didn't hit the bastard as hard as I thought.
Come on, Valdes
Valdes whispered.
pivoting the lens away from Samson and back to the door. I squinted and leaned forward. The door opened one final time and a tall, narrow man with a head full of gray hair stepped out. He wore a shiny blue suit with a red tie. "Gotcha," Valdes hissed, camera snapping away. A city councilman meeting with a contingent of dirty cops, led by none other than the police chief himself. Definitely interesting, definitely not good. "Abe, I grunted. Valdes turned those dark, stormy eyes in my direction again. She had gotten everything Jacoby needed. "Look, I know you're gonna do what you're gonna do, and you know I've got your back no matter what. But if you want my professional opinion," she continued, "I would strongly recommend staying away from that rally tonight." She wasn't wrong. Putting aside my own super empathy issues, if Councilman White was behind the Nazis, and the city's police force was in on the action, this rally was shaping up to be a tinderbox. Unfortunately, 12 grand begged to differ. "I am serious, Abe," Valdes said in her low, monotone voice. "If White is using the police to clear the way for the Sons of the Golden Future." I cut her off firmly. The only way I'm torpedoing this gig is if Josephine can't corroborate Beckett Miller's story. Valdez's expression flashed neutral, the storm evaporating from her eyes. She nodded. "All right then." I raised a curious eyebrow at her sudden pivot. She turned the key in the ignition, bringing the truck to life and shifting it into gear. "Let's go talk to Josephine."